Good to see you out this morning. We're happy that you're with us this morning, and we're going to take our lesson this morning from our theme for the month, which was Labor Day. And of course, planned on doing this sooner in the month, but as you know, my issues came up that created a postpone in that. But I want to look at this morning this idea of work. And thank you to Logan for leading that song that prior to our lesson this morning. And this morning's lesson, we're going to be based upon, we're going to look at 6 godly principles of work. Work today takes on many different forms and fashion, not typical manual labor with a shovel digging a ditch is too common anymore. Typically, we have machines that do that sort of thing today. Of course, if you were around Loretta's dad, he didn't believe in anything like that. It was still a shovel and a pick and dig it the hard way, which typically the way he did things was always the hard way, it seemed like. But work has certainly taken on different forms. Work is certainly not just manual labor. There's other forms. We'll look at that here a little bit more as we go on, but our verse of this morning that's going to be taken from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. So if you have your Bibles or you just want to follow along on the screen, I'll have them posted as I normally do. But Ecclesiastes chapter 3, starting in verse 9, read along with me. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given tasks with which the Son of Men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and that also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God. Labor, working, is the gift. The fruits that come from your labor is a gift given to us by God. That's something we're going to look at this morning. We'll look at 6 different principles. But if you, as I've said in our earlier comments, work takes on many different forms. You might be a truck driver or a bus driver of some sort. If you've ever done that job, you know that's hard work. Even though you're sitting, you just drive back and forth to Columbus once in a while and see how it takes a toll on the body. It will work on you. If you do that day in and day out, it eventually will work on you. You may just work in an office, or maybe you work from home. It's still work. You may manage a company or a business in some way, and you manage other people, and you realize that, as everybody says, the managers don't do anything. They just sit back and do nothing. That's not true either, is it? We find that they typically do the bulk of the work and try to fix everybody else's problems. And so it's typically a lot of work in that field as well. How about a teacher? The work that a teacher might put in. I just cringe to think of the idea of teaching a class with 25 little rugrats running around. Oh, just shoot me now. Would you just put me out of my misery? Because it would just be a nightmare. I don't know how they do it. I really don't. Mike has done it for many, many years. And of course, maybe that's why he has those tics, maybe that's why he does the things he does. And Jim, of course, taught for many years. I think Chris did as well. Those folks, I appreciate them so much because they put in a lot of effort to do the job that they do. Work, you see, takes on many different forms, doesn't it? And you might just be working in a factory making widgets or putting this part into that part and sending it on down the line. That's certainly work. Nevertheless, today our work has taken on many different forms, and especially in our modern culture today. Just briefly, a little bit of quick history on Labor Day, which was the beginning of our month and based upon our theme. couple brief history marks on that. It began September the 5th, 1882, which I had no idea until I studied this, that it had been that long that it would actually happen. But 20,000 workers in New York City started a parade down the center of the main, one of the main roads there, and celebrated workers. And so therefore, President Grover Cleveland signed it into a federal law in 1894. So 12 years after that, he decided to make this a federal law to celebrate workers. And if you know anything about our culture today, we are certainly lax in that department, aren't we? Work in the United States today is something strange. We notice statistics, and this is just coming out of COVID in August of 2021, the unemployment rate in the United States was 1.5%. And today, in first part of August or September 22, it's at 3.7. And of course, the experts say that full employment is considered anything below 5%. So that tells us that workers are needed today in our culture to make things happen. And that's certainly true. Now, you can make the argument that there's plenty of employment, but they don't pay enough and all that. We're not going to get into the politics of all that. But the bottom line is workers are needed today in our culture. We're certainly going to keep that in mind. Working today in the United States, statistically, 65% of workers say that they're satisfied with their job. And 20% are passionate about that. And that's probably true. If you think back and you think at your job, wherever you might work, that's probably about right. Most people are okay with what they're doing. They're satisfied with it. But there's only a portion of them that are really passionate about what they do. They want to produce a good product or service for what they're doing. And then, of course, you have the other 15% that just hate their job. They're there and they are miserable. And we know what that's all about. We've seen that, haven't we? Well, we're going to talk about those things here this morning. And with the time that's remaining with us this morning, I'm going to look at 6 godly principles for work. Labor is important. And the Bible has much to say on the subject of work because it is very important. We typically, when we talk about Labor Day sermons, we usually focus on the fact that the church needs laborers. And that's certainly true. We're going to talk about that next month more in particular. But I wanted to take the slant in September here to talk about physical labor and what the Bible talks about with that. And it has a lot to say about that. Digging a ditch or using a shovel is no fun. It is hard work, but nevertheless, any kind of labor can be hard, and it certainly is, depending on the type of work we're doing, can be exhausting. But we're going to look at what God says, which is more important than statistics or anything that I've got to say. It's more important about what God thinks about labor, and that's what we're going to look at here this morning for the time that's remaining. We're going to look at 6 godly characteristics of work. One thing that is true with God is with work is God ordained work. He put it in order and put it into place. Notice with me, if you will, in Genesis chapter 2, and we're going to start reading in verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the 7th day, God ended his work. Even God works from the works which he had done. And he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had done. Then God, verse 3, blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his work which God had created and made. God sanctions or ordained work. It's a good thing for us to work. And God even, we see here, work. Now, I don't know that God necessarily sweats, but his work is a little different, but yet it's still referred to as work. It certainly was something that he did in order to do that. Ecclesiastes, we're going to refer to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and some other chapters somewhat several times here through this lesson because it really speaks to this question and this thought of labor and with work. But look what Ecclesiastes chapter 3, look at verse 9 with me this morning. What profit has the worker from that which he labors? What good is it? What good does labor do for those that work? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. God gave us these different tasks. God ordained this and set it in order for us to work. And it is made for us to be occupied by it. We're going to talk about that a little more as we carry on. But notice in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 10 says that if the man's not to work, he's not to eat. Well, if we put that into order today, how much work would we get done? Probably a little more than maybe sometimes we do, right? But 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 11 goes on to say, for we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at all, but are busybodies. You see, work is made for us to occupy ourselves and to stay occupied with it. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 26 says it this way. The person who labors for himself, for his hunger drives him on. You get hungry enough, you'll work. That's the point. But he says ungodly men, that is contrasting those that work. That would be someone who doesn't work. An ungodly man digs up evil, and it's on his lips like a burning fire. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him in a way that is not good. We might say it this way today, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And isn't that not true? I find myself getting into trouble when I'm bored. That's when I find myself getting into things that I ought not, doing things that I shouldn't do, beginning to worry about things I shouldn't worry about, begin to plan things that are evil that I shouldn't plan. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. It's not a biblical statement, but it surely is a biblical statement. The truth, isn't it? That the idle hands are the devil's workshop. The second thing that of these godly principles of work is for a lifetime. You're not going to get away from it. Yes, you might acquire enough money to retire one day, which I hope you do. That's great. But that doesn't stop our work, does it? Our work continues on. Notice with me here in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 17. God says, then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. Can we ever get away from weeds growing? You can't. They are forever. You cannot plant anything that there's not weeds growing up. And that is part of this curse that was placed upon man for their part in their sin in this. So you might be able to retire, but yet work continues on. You can't even, it's amazing how weeds spring up in the craziest places. The crack in a sidewalk will produce a weed. The gutters on your house can grow weeds. It's crazy. But that's part of the way God has set things up. Work is for a lifetime. Genesis chapter 3 goes on and says, in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread how long? Till you return to the ground. You're going to work, at least to some degree, until you die. For out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. You're not getting away from it. When it comes to the spiritual side, certainly that's true as well, right? In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58, Paul says, therefore, by my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. We still have work to do. Oftentimes we find folks that want to retire from the church. And we know from verses like this and many others, we just can't. We need to continue always abounding in the work of the Lord. Oh, I'm too old. I can't do this anymore. I'm this, I'm that. Well, as we certainly age, we know things do slow down, but we can certainly still be a major asset in the work of the church, no matter what our age is. The third point this morning is there are three main reasons God gives us why we should work in the first place. Why do we even work? Why get up in the morning and go to work? Why should we do that? Well, there's three main points to that. The first thing that God has ordained as far as work is to supply the needs of our family. We have to live. We have to feed ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves, don't we? 1 Timothy chapter 5 reminds us of that. Honor widows who are widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. If anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's rule one God has ordained for us to do, is to take care of our families. If we have elderly in our family, take care of them too, so that we take care of our own. If we don't do that, he says you're worse than an unbeliever. So certainly that's one reason why we work today. The second reason why we work today is to be able to enjoy life. There is nothing wrong with enjoying what you make. If you make money and are rich today, great. Enjoy it. But put it in its proper perspective. There is nothing wrong with being prosperous. Look at Ecclesiastes, as we said we would go back to there throughout this lesson. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, look at verse 12. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labors. It is the gift of God. If you have prospered in your life from your work, God gave you that. Enjoy it. Take time to enjoy the things that God has blessed you with. It is the gift of God. If God didn't want you to have it, he would not have given you the ability to do those things. That's another reason why we work. And the third point, Ecclesiastes 5 verse 18 goes on to say, here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his heritage. This is why we do it. We work so that we can provide for our own and enjoy it. Nothing wrong with that. And we certainly realize that God has ordained that for us in our work. If you make a lot of money, great. I am happy for you. That's wonderful. Take care of it. Take care of your family. Enjoy it and help others. That's the third point that God gives us reasons for us to work, to have extra so that we can help those who are in need. Notice Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 28. Let him that stole steal no longer. In other words, work for what you get. Don't steal it, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give to him who has needs. You see, there's our problem, is we get these three reasons for working out of balance sometimes. Sometimes it's all about the enjoyment, and we don't really worry about taking care of our family, and we don't certainly worry about others. And then there's some folks that work simply to enjoy it or to give it to their family, and then they don't have anything left over to help anybody else with, and they don't enjoy it. You see, God has set these in order for us to have them in a balance, that we all do all three of these portions of this work and the reasons why we do work: to take care of our family, to enjoy it, and to also help others with it. The fourth godly principle for work today is work is so that God is seen in us. We should be able to be seen in our work. God should be seen in how we operate at work. When we're at work, when we're taking care of God, our business, we're still godly people. We don't set that aside and become corrupt in our work and then put on our new set of clothes and change that behavior. God needs to be seen in our work. Notice with me in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 22. Bondservants, or you that work, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters or your bosses, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. When we go to work, it should be working as if we're working for the Lord. And God should be seen in our work. We should be able to see, people should be able to see God in the things we do. I remember my dad was a truck driver, but then he also worked on trucks as well. And if you ever was at our shop, he took pride in what he did, and he tried to be a godly man while he worked. And he looked at it as a craftsman. In other words, if you can think and you can visualize in your mind an intricate craftsman, say a carpenter who is carving out a sculpture in wood, and they take pride in every little detail. That's certainly what he's saying here we should do. We should be careful and let God be seen in us. And it's not just with eye service, or in other words, doing it while the boss is around. And once the boss turns his back, I go back to sleeping. I'm doing these things in a proper way so that God can be seen in my work. If whatever in Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. Whatever your job, if you're a bus driver, if you're a truck driver, if you're working in an office, whatever you do, let it be done with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in the grave or Sheol to which you're going. You better get it done, because time is ticking for us all. Work so that God can be seen in us. The fifth point then is which goes along with that, is work with excellence. Work with pride in our work. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 5. Bondservants, or the workers, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling. Do we look at our boss with a reverential respect? That's what he's saying. With fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ. Not by the way of eye service, again, and people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man. When we work, we're working, and we're to be seen. God is to be seen in us as we work, and we are to do this with excellence, with our very, very best. Carries on here in verse 8, knowing that whatever good anyone does, This he will receive back from the Lord. Whether he's a bondservant or free, masters, do the same. And stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. If you're a boss, then be careful how you treat your employees. Treat your employees with respect and take care of them in such a way. You see, there's rules. There are ways God has set up and ordained how we are to handle ourselves in business and work. Working with excellence and taking care of our business. Sixth and final point this morning, we'll let you go, is God works, and work gives us the chance to be the light of the world. Now, I realize that in our community today, in our society today, speaking spiritual things while working is usually frowned upon. Your bosses and the higher ups in the companies usually frown on that sort of thing. Now, there was a time when that wasn't the case, when we could, at lunch or while we were working, we could talk about spiritual matters. But that's changed somewhat in our culture today, hasn't it? But still, we can still be that light into the community for others. We need to be able to see God being seen in our lives while we work, and also give us a chance to show that light to others. You may be the only opportunity that somebody at work gets the chance to know what God is all about. They may have come from a family that didn't go to church at all, never cracked the Bible ever, and yet your lifestyle may be what shines into their life. And how you work shows. Every single one of us that's worked with a company knows that there are slackers, there are people that cheat the company, there are people that steal, there are people that sleep during the work times. And yet we know that that's not what God would have us to do. As Christians, we should be the example setters, shouldn't we? And be those that are the ones that are the example that others are looking to and saying, that's how we should live. That's how we should conduct ourselves. That's being the light. And during our work is one way we can do that. John chapter 15 and verse 18 says, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would have loved you and its own, as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I choose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. We can say it this way: we are in the world, but not of the world. That's the point. And while we work is a perfect opportunity to display that truth, that we certainly live amongst the world. We work among the world. And oftentimes we spend more time at work with our coworkers than we do our families at home. Isn't that odd? And yet, what kind of an opportunity are we wasting often by not allowing our light to shine while we're there at work? Think about it, 8 or 10, maybe 12 hours a day, you might be at work with others. And you come home, you gobble something down, and you go to bed. And you never get that much time often with our family as we do with our coworkers. We are in the world, but we can't be of the world. John chapter 17 and verse 14. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Being of the world, being in the world, but not of the world. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 21. If indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning your former conduct, that old man which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. It's a mindset, isn't it? and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and in holiness. God gives us the chance to be that light into the world. And we can do that oftentimes through our work and be that light. I hope this lesson has been interesting to you. Lessons like this are unique, and we only really do those once in a great while when it comes to Labor Day, and gives us an opportunity to do that. But I hope you think about these lessons and hope you think about this idea of our work and making sure that our work is appropriate before man and before God. We're going to sing this song here, which appropriately says, "Live for Jesus." And as we work and live in this world, we should make sure that we are living and working for Jesus today. If you're here this morning and you're not a member of the Lord's church and would like to become a member of the Lord's church by being faithful to his word and believing his word, believing that he is the Son of God, making that confession before men that he is the Son of God, repenting of your sins and being baptized for the remission of your sins, then we want to help you in that effort today. If you're here this morning and you've fallen away and need to restore and be restored back, we hope you will, as together we stand and sing this song, number 613.